Defund the police. It sounds like a great rallying cry, and it's something that can get a lot of people on one side of the issue excited, and in fact, people on the other side. We have to protect our police officers, and yes, another great conflict is coming in America. But really, does it have to go down this way? Are there important reforms in how municipal services are delivered? And is there a good reason for reevaluating this? The answer is yes, of course. And going with the slogans and the rallying cries and the extreme positions really isn't going to help us. Let's sit down and think about what it is that we're really trying to accomplish here. And I want to start by telling you a story where I confess, well, how old I am. Back when I was little in the 1970s, there was no such thing as a paramedic or EMT, emergency medical technician. They just, if you had a medical emergency, you'd call up the fire department or the police department, and they would come out and they might transport you in an ambulance, but the ambulance was, well, it was actually a hearse, is what it was. It's a place you could just put a stretcher in, and they would take you to the hospital as rapidly as possible. There was a movement in the 1970s to create emergency medical technicians. Now, implementing this at the local level was one thing, but there had to be all kinds of training and so on. The program that was developed based on leadership at the national level, but the implementation was done at communities. And we started seeing those big trucks that are common across America now, the paramedic units, really started arriving in the 1970s. There was even a TV show about this whole new profession that had arrived. By 1998, 95% of municipalities had emergency medical technicians, generally reporting through the fire department, but not necessarily. It was a big change in municipal services that freed up the police and the fire to handle their own things and provided a dedicated core of professionals who knew exactly what they were doing and who could save lives. I want to start with this because the idea of reform in municipal services is an old one. We need to constantly evolve and look at how we're delivering the services and what it is we're trying to accomplish. Now, if you state and local government altogether in the United States is about $3.4 trillion as of 2017, which is very similar for the federal government in the same year of about 3.5 trillion, very similar in number. Police account for about 13% of it, and the fire paramedic and all the other municipal services like that are another 8%, 21% total. It's not a ridiculous number, but it's big. Altogether, it comes out to about 3.5% of our total economy, our total gross domestic product. It's not a small number, but you think about it. I mean, we're counting on these people to save our lives, so yeah, it's reasonable. But are we doing this the most effective way possible? And the development of EMTs, it shows how reform can be accomplished, at least in something that's not emotional. Now, when we talk about reforming how police do their jobs, the question becomes, what are we trying to accomplish? The goal is what? Reduction in crime, improvement in overall city services. Is a police force, the people with the guns forcing their way through, the way to do it? In the 1990s, the answer was, oh yes, we have this huge increase in crime that's going on. Well, in the 1990s, there was a bit of a wave of violent crime, but violent crime has been going down steadily, really, my entire life. There was a great increase in the number of things that we called crimes, largely drug crimes, and more police officers were needed to enforce these new laws. And, is this the best way to do it? I want to tell you some stories from St. Paul, Minnesota, where I worked with a community for a long time. See, they had a different approach. It's a city of 300,000 people, a medium-sized city. And in my particular neighborhood, there were periodic crime problems. There certainly were. And the very capable police force would often come out to the community and basically talk through with people how to watch for crime, how to be as they said, the eyes and ears of the police department. They taught people how to file an effective police report, give them the information that they needed. They taught people how to protect themselves, where you need locks on your windows. And they would go out to businesses individually and say, oh, yeah, you could use more lighting up here and all that. We were really big on streetlights generally in the community. We worked very, very closely with the police, and thousands of tiny little changes overall made a big difference. Okay? This is a concept of vigilance, I suppose. We often think of, citizens standing with a shotgun to protect their business. Well, there are a lot of other things you can do. Uh, one interesting example was there was a man named Mike Smith, his real name, um, who I don't know what happened in his life, but he couldn't get off the drugs. Okay, and he would go around breaking into houses, and we had to do something about that. The police, there's a certain response time to everything, and this guy was really good at just getting in and getting out. So it came down to the neighbors organizing to keep track of what was going on, and eventually they were able to catch him in the act, put him away for a few years. Sometime afterwards, our community organizer, paid position, uh, saw the same pattern developing. People were reporting to her, and she called up the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and said, "Do you guys let out Mike Smith?" And they're like, "Yeah." "How'd you know?" Really? But this is what makes a big difference in terms of reducing things like property crime. The police can't be everywhere at once. They have to have a relationship with the community and they have to work with the community to do it. And for that matter, I mean, what do police actually do? I'm going to include a link to a recent New York Times article as to how police actually spend their time. About a third of it, 33% roughly, is just little piddly things that could be handled by just about anyone else. About 20% is traffic crime. Actual violent crime, 5%. Okay? So for all this money that we spend on police, only about 5% of it are the times when we really need that person with a gun, that person that can handle the violent crime situation. That's the issue at hand. We do spend a tremendous amount of money on these municipal services, but it's even more than the immediate budget concern that where we could actually potentially save some money. There's a real problem with pensions that a lot of police officers, the baby boom generation, they're aging out or whatever, and it's time for their pension. California has a pension system that, well, was part of a proposition way back in the 90s that it's gotten out of control. At this point, there are $234 billion in unfunded pension requirements for public employees, and about 36% of that is police. Now, there's a case pending before the California Supreme Court where a lot of police officers were able to get really inflated salaries the last few years of their career, get their high five so that their pension would be higher. They're going to see if they can get that reduced. That's pending before the California Supreme Court. But the amount of money involved is just absolutely tremendous. And the question becomes, are we spending it as effectively as we can to accomplish the real goals that we have? I mean, reducing crime in the case of the police force. And the answer is probably not. What we found in St. Paul is the most effective things were all these little things working together with the community, getting community volunteers to give their information, provide the proper reports, and provide a lot of things like street lighting and just get everybody connected into the system. That was more important than anything. This is what a good community organizer can do. And the time spent dealing with homeless people who have, in many cases, very severe mental illnesses, is that really best handled by somebody who's trained with a gun? Again, 5% of their time is spent with violent crime. So when we talk about things like defund the police department, I mean, that's one extreme way of talking about it. But what we really need to look at is reform in municipal services. Again, cities are the bedrock of our whole nation, our whole political system, and how we interact with everything. They necessarily spend a tremendous amount of money because what? These are the things that directly affect your life. They're the ones that can save your life in many cases. Are we really spending that money effectively? The answer is, we're asking police to do all of these kinds of services, the community management, the psychological management, all of these different things. Is this really the right training to be able to provide all of these different things? The answer is more and more no. Now, along with the development of emergency medical technicians in the United States came the 911 system. Again, started kind of at the top. It was first done in, I think, Los Angeles, but it spread out to the rest of the country because it was just a good idea. Once we understood how to do it, everybody could be trained, and now the whole country is covered by this system of these incredible phone operators who can determine what services are needed for the particular call. Sometimes it's a person with a gun. Sometimes it's a person with a syringe. Sometimes it's a person who just needs to talk down the situation or go out and find out what's really going on to figure out what's happening. Do we really need to spend all of this money on police that are armed, that are there, ready to come in, roll at a moment's notice? The answer is, if you look at how police spend their time, no. And we do spend a tremendous amount of money on it. We have a tremendous number of unfunded mandates in terms of pensions that are just hanging over our heads as we kind of kick the can down the road when we started this big wave of police in the 1990s. Is it important to change how we do things? Yes. Defund the police? Defend our police? No, that's not going to get us anywhere. If we're going to reform the bedrock of our nation, which is the community in which we live, we need a good connection between the citizens and the people who are managing all of this. The amount of money involved is huge. It's about as big as the federal budget, and we don't really talk about it in terms of the same thing. We always pay attention to what's going on at the tippy top. What's happening in the community level is extremely important, and the relationship between the community and the police is extremely important. That's often best handled by somebody who it's their job to handle nothing more than the community services and organize people so that they can be more effective at taking care of business themselves. That's what we're really talking about. This is an important reform movement that the center absolutely needs to hold on. We cannot let this get polarized. We need to do that for reasons of money, for reasons of effectiveness, and yes, for controlling the brutality. Things have just gotten out of whack. That happens. Fine. Let's do something about it. Shouting a bunch of slogans and organizing ourselves to make this into a big political battle where we stand at loggerheads. Hey, look, we've all seen that movie before. That's the best recipe for nothing good to happen. It's important for the center to hold and sit down and ask, what are we really trying to accomplish? How can we best accomplish it for reasons that will benefit everyone? Thank you.